Thank you very much. I will put the, let me see. Okay. So, well, hello, everybody. It's really great to be with you. I, first of all, want to thank very much to Benjamin Hill and to Alberto Luis for the invitation to be with you. And I would like very much all your comments and suggestions and everything that you can see on the paper, because it's a working paper, and paper it's in process, so it will be very helpful for me to have all your comments so I can improve it. In the chat, you will find the last version, the one that I'm going to read right now. And also you will find the handout for the paper. But you already have the original paper that it's longer and it considers other points. So I hope to take about 30 minutes or so to do the exposition. And well, this paper is Spinoza on language. And let me start then. Spinoza is commonly known for his extreme rationalism. He thinks that we only know things truly and inadequately through intellectual inference, that is to say, through demonstrations made by reason and intuitive science, which he considers the second and the third kinds of knowledge, respectively. While contemporary philosophers such as Leibniz consider language as one of the primary philosophical issues to study, for Spinoza it's only part of imagination, the first kind of knowledge. According to him, words are a source of error and falsity because, among other things, it gives us an inadequate knowledge of the thing's product of contingent associations between bodily motions and images. Spinoza has a conventionalist and a nominalist position on language. Some scholars have understood that that Spinoza should conclude that language is always deceitful. In that case, the Dutch philosopher should have concluded the idea that adequate knowledge cannot relate with language. But this is an odd conclusion. This gives rise to a number of problems for Spinoza's philosophy. Mainly, it seems that there is an unbridgeable gap between language and intellect. That is to say, between arbitrary associations of images and ideas on the one hand, and eternal, immutable ideas on the other hand. If this is the case, then language has no room in Spinoza's philosophy, and he will be vain in his efforts to use it even under a geometrical method. This paper has 4 aims. First, explain the notation in language according to Spinoza's philosophy. Second, propose an explanation on why language is inadequate knowledge because of its contingent association. Third, explain connotation and action in language. And finally, argue on the Spinozan use of the geometrical method as a solution for the adequate use of language in philosophical and scientific work. So let's start with the notation in language. In order to understand Spinoza's conception of language, we must summarize certain principles of Spinoza's metaphysics and epistemology. He affirms that God is the unique substance which expresses its essence in infinite attributes, from which thought and extension are 2 of them. Because God expresses the same essence in infinite modes through infinite attributes, each attribute has the same order and connection in their respective modifications. For Spinoza, there is no metaphysical contingency because everything that exists is a modification of God. Everything has been determined by God to exist and act in a certain way. A true idea is that which corresponds to its object. Because the knowledge of an object implies the knowledge of its causes, a true idea of an object implies the knowledge of its causes. The human mind has a true and necessary idea of one thing insofar it has the idea of its essence, by which it deduces its properties. An adequate idea has all the intrinsic properties of a true idea, but without need of the extrinsic properties of the true idea. God's intellect understands an adequate idea only through the human mind. On the contrary, an idea that a human mind has is inadequate if God's intellect understands it through the human mind affected by other ideas. This is what happens with imagination, and therefore this is what will happen with language. For Spinoza, language is an association of images and ideas. The process of association is described in the following proposition. If the human body has once been affected by two or more bodies at the same time, sorry, I'm quoting Spinoza, then when the mind subsequently imagines one of them, it will immediately recollect the others also, end of quote. According to Spinoza, words are constituted by the association of corporeal motions and therefore invoke the principles of extension. When the human body is frequently affected by certain bodies, its brain retains impressions of them. This process begins with an external object affecting frequently an external sense of the human body. For example, sight, smell, touch, so forth. The resulting brain impression is a mode, an affection, of the human body that involves the nature of both bodies, the human body and the external body, but not in the same manner. An image is an idea of an affection of the human body that is an idea of a certain mode preserved in the human body. When the human mind affirms that image, it also affirms a particular constitution of the human body. That is to say, the actual existence of the nature of the human body, as well as the particular existence of the external body. Spinoza identifies image and representation because they both require a medium, in this case, the brain impression that involves a determinate causal affection from an external body, that brings to the mind something that does not have to be present at the moment of the contemplation. Spinoza calls images of things any idea of the brain impression that implies the nature of an external body and represents it as if it were present, even though it is not really present or it no longer exists. For Spinoza's epistemology, any image is an idea by which the mind affirms the actual existence of the represented object. This is because he considers that ideas are not inactive representations, but products of the mind's activity or passivity. Spinoza includes as images affections that do not reproduce the figures of things, in order to incorporate not only pictures, but any affection that represents an external body, such as sounds. Spinoza calls memory, let's see if there, okay, we are there. Spinoza calls memory this process. Even though the demonstration does not mention it, this process of association of images happens in the attribute of thought. Meanwhile, by the parallelism of the attributes, occurs an association of brain impressions in the attribute of extension. When the mind affirms one of these impressions, it immediately will affirm the other impression. Thus, the human mind will imagine both things at the same time. Spinoza puts an example, and I quote, "And from this process of association of images, we clearly understand why the mind, from the thought of one thing, immediately passes to the thought of another, which has no likeness to the first. As, for example, from the thought of the word pomum, a Roman will immediately pass to the thought of the fruit, that's for say an apple, which has no similarity to that articulate sound and nothing in common with it except that the body of the same man has often been affected by these two at the same time. That is, that the man often heard the word pomum while he saw the fruit," end of quote. This process of association of ideas explains the denotation of or signification of nouns. The articulate sound pomum is an affection of the human body, as well as the sensory perception of an apple. The human body is capable of being affected at the same time by both affections, and when this process happens regularly, it retains both affections as if it were one. Thus, the human mind would remember both images at the same time when it imagines one of them. This is the origin of denotation, signification, or reference of nouns. In this process, certain images of sensory perception are joined in the first train of thought that relates them. The articulated sounds pomum, apple, apfel, manzana are not part of the nature of the red fruit or green fruit that they denote, but are related to it through certain natural language education. None of these articulated sounds express the nature of the apple. They only indicate those features by which the human body has been affected by the apple, such as certain colors, shape, smell, or taste, etc. Spinoza has a conventionalist conception of language. Language is grounded in explicit or implicit agreements established by habit. Language does not have an ontological relation with essence of things. For Spinoza, languages are natural languages, and he makes no distinction between a natural language and a formal language. Through words, we signify things. According to Spinoza, a word is a synthesis or association between certain sounds and certain images of things. These images are also a synthesis of other images. Thus, a word is a sign that refers to certain images. Now let's go on with the second part of the paper, language inadequacy, contingent association. Spinoza considers that memory is, and I quote, a certain connection of ideas involving the nature of things which are outside the human body, a connection which is in the mind according to the order and connection of the affections of the human body, end of quote. Memory is the mental correspondence of a physical association of brain impressions. It is a certain association of images of bodies that affect the human body in a certain order. The association of images depends on the order and connection by which bodies have affected the human body. But this order does not express the nature or essence of those bodies. Consequently, Spinoza continues, and I quote, I say first, that the connection is only of those ideas which involve the nature of things outside the human body, but not of the ideas which explain the nature of the same things, for they are really ideas of affections of the human body which involve both its nature and that of external bodies, end of quote. The nature of things are the essence and intrinsic features of the bodies represented. Memory does not express the nature of things, but only involves, that is to say, but only involves it. That is to say, memory expresses only a fragmentary part of the causal process of association of external body affections. Even though there is no metaphysical contingency according to Spinoza, each person has a different memory insofar they are affected by things in a different order. Memory and images are not adequate ideas of the things they represent. Spinoza continues on the scholium on proposition 18 in the part 2 of the Ethics, and I quote, I say, second, that this connection, that is to say memory, happens according to the order and connection of the affections of the human body in order to establish it from the connection, in order to distinguish it from the connection of ideas which happens according to the order of the intellect, by which the mind perceives things through their first causes, and which is the same in all men, end of quote. Memory does not represent the first causes of things, but only the way images are associated through the way they affect at the same time to a person, especially if it is a frequent affection. On the contrary, the order of the intellect follows the metaphysical order because it is the order of connection and of the essence of things. An image is not an idea of the essence of an external object. An image is an inadequate idea because it does not indicate the nature or intrinsic properties of the human body nor of the external body. That is to say that through imagination, the human mind does not have adequate knowledge of its body, itself, and external bodies. An association of images is an effect without its causes. For instance, when a person looks at an apple for a certain amount of time, he will be able to retain the image of the apple and represent it with the features with which he saw it. For example, if he saw a fresh apple, he will recall the apple with the features of a certain colors, textures, smell, etc., not those of a baked apple or a painted apple. That image does not involve the essence of the apple, but only the way in which that apple affected the human sight. Now let's go on to the third part of the paper, connotation and action in language. Memory does not stop with only one reference for each sign, but will associate to each sign as many experiences as the person had with it. This association goes with a train of thoughts grounded in the particular habit of the person. Spinoza says that by the continuation of the process of memory, and I quote, each of us will pass from one thought to another, as each one's association has ordered the ideas of things in the body. For example, a soldier, having seen traces of a horse in the sand, will immediately pass from the thought of a horse to the thought of a horseman, and from that to the thought of war, and so on. But a farmer will pass from the thought of a horse to the thought of a plow, and then to that of a field, and so on. And so each one, according as he has been accustomed to join and connect the images of things in this or that way, will pass from one thought to another, end of quote. Through other ideas related to the word's reference, the human mind will continue another train of thoughts, which we can call the connotation of the word. The different experiences and habits of a soldier and a farmer constitute a different train of thoughts that correspond to the way by which their respective bodies have associated affections. Being the sign that traces of a horse, the denotation of that sign will be a horse for both a soldier and a farmer. But each one has different experiences with a horse. Thus, the connotation that each one gives to that sign is different. The soldier has a train of thoughts that goes to a horseman, then to the thought of war, and so on. The farmer goes to a plow, and then the thought to the thought of a field, and so on. Meanwhile, the traces of a horse in the sand induce a train of thoughts related with war. In the farmer, they activate a train of thoughts related with the plow. The traces of the horse do not involve the nature of war, neither of plow. But the soldier and the farmer's respective experiences make that relation. Thus, the connotation of a word will depend on the particular experiences of each one. Is there something that we can do with language? The terms soldier and farmer refer to specific occupations, experiences, and train of thoughts. Even though a soldier and a farmer will discuss on the connotation of the horse prints, a group of soldiers and a group of farmers will convey in the connotation of the horse prints. Thus, Spinoza is capable of explaining intersubjective knowledge in a certain community as soldiers or farmers. He does this with this concept of ingenium. Each context of the notation and connotation will impel their members to make the same mental associations with words. According to Spinoza, it's really difficult to change the meaning of a word. This is very important for Spinoza's interpretation of a scripture. And finally, we will pass to the last part of the paper, positivity in the image and its guidance under the intellect. Is there something we can do with language? Do we have to put it aside and search for truth only in reason and intuitive intellection that never deals with language? By way of what we have already said, we can be aware that words can deceive us. But at the same time, we know that any word is the idea of a causal physical process that expresses the power of extension, that is to say, association laws of habit. After defining 20 affects, such as desire, joy, and sadness, at the end of the book 3 of the Ethics, Spinoza says, and I quote, I know that in their common usage, these words, when he was defining desire, joy, sadness, etc., this word means something else. But my purpose is to explain the nature of things, not the meaning of words. I intend to indicate these things by words whose usual meaning is not entirely opposed to the meaning with which I wish to use them. One warning of this should suffice, end of quote. This does not exclude the scientific or philosophical usage of language. It warns on the inadequacy of language. This passage shows, first, a straight relation between words and ideas, although in this case, it is a relation between a word and an inadequate idea. Second, it shows a distinction between common usage of words and a philosophical usage, which interests more to Spinoza. For Spinoza, any idea can be accompanied by an image, even though the image is not explaining the idea. It is important to note that with the association process between a word and a sensory perception, Spinoza can explain truth in nouns and propositions that have a physical reference identified through sensory perception. In this case, a word or a proposition will express a true idea if it corresponds to a physical object, being sensory perception the medium of validation. Nonetheless, the word or preposition is a sign that is not true in itself, only if it's related to a true idea. Now it is time to ask Spinoza about words and propositions that do not refer to physical things. Mainly, what happens with metaphysical terms? Being Spinoza known as a metaphysical rationalist, he needs to have an explanation of the use of metaphysical terms. Spinoza says that, and I quote, Euclid, who wrote nothing that was not eminently straightforward and highly intelligible, is easily explained by anyone in any language. In order to see his meaning and be certain of his sense, there is no need to have a complete knowledge of the language in which he wrote, but only a very modest, even a schoolboy, acquaintance with it. Nor does one need to know the life, interest, and character of the author, nor in what language he wrote, to whom and when, nor the subsequent fate of his books or its variant readings, nor how or by what council it was authorized. End of quote. Through the rational definition of terms, by which the human mind can recall previous deductions, the human mind can reuse language for philosophical and scientific purposes. In this case, words will be joined to a rational denotation by which the human mind will follow not the contextual connotation, but the rational deduction. For the Dutch philosopher, the geometrical order is a kind of mental map that point out metaphysical entities and distinguish them from mental entities, both entities from imagination and entities from reason, and indicates certain results that we must expect so long as we are doing the correct inference and mental associations with them. Now, some brief conclusions. I have argued that language gives an inadequate knowledge of things insofar it is an idea of images and bodily emotions associated arbitrarily. Thus, it represents fragments of a complete causal process. I also have stated that language falsity consists in the absence of correspondence between the word and a real thing. Meanwhile, error is the mental operation where a human mind affirms that the thing represented by a word actually exists. In order to do this, I have studied 4 examples in the language. Well, first of all, it was the word pomum and its denotation is the association of 2 bodily motions. Then we have the horse prints in the sand and its connotations are a train of thoughts joined through habit. In the full extended paper, you have seen other examples that those will be universal terms such as man, horse, and good, that are a certain degree of subtractions of particular by habit. And you will also see in that paper transcendental terms such as being and think that are a total abstraction of particulars. So in this shorter version of the paper, I omitted the universal terms and the transcendental terms, but for the argument, it also I think it will be working, no? So I have proposed that for Spinoza, language inadequacy can be overcome by a rational model that incorporates words redefined and related with common notions, intellectual intuitions, and the result of rational deduction, in which case language follows adequate ideas and be signs of true knowledge. Geometrical method offers such rational model, but the application of this method to metaphysics is not as straightforward as Spinoza intended. Well, thank you very much. This will be the shorter version of the paper. Now we can pass to the questions. I will be delighted to hear you.
Hey, thank you, Luis. As Luis said, we have now time for questions and answers. So, well, if someone has a doubt, a question and comment, please, now you can do it. So, Lionel, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Luis. I would like to ask if it's so. There is for Spinoza two kinds of languages. I mean, the first one, which refers to particular objects, which has a particular explanation and origin from external objects, and the second one would be a kind of the language of rational intuition, for example. No? If it's so, we have two kinds of languages with different metaphysical roots.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Leonel, for the question. It's a really interesting one. I think that Spinoza should consider only one kind of language. So for his philosophy, everything is, God is immanent to everything. So he's the causal immanence for all the things. So there's no really, when we're talking about essence of things, when we're talking about metaphysical entities, we're talking also about things that are causing, that are part of the human mind or the human body. So when we talk about common notions, let's say the principles of bodies that work on bodies, such as motion and rest and things like that, those are things that are occurring, are actualizing the human body. So it's not an external thing. No, it's not like the laws of bodies or the laws of thought are external to the human mind or to the human body, but they are internal. So they will be always, when we're talking about common notions as principles, well, it's something that, well, I missed to say, that I'm sorry, is that how it works, how the geometrical method works for Spinoza. So the geometrical method works on, first of all, has certain principles that will help us to deduce certain propositions. And what he considers these principles are axioms that will be these common notions that we can form between our body and other bodies and our mind and other ideas. And all these things are not external to the human body or to the human mind, but they are properties and they are common to everything, because after all, the human mind and the human body are expressions, are actualization of the things. No? So language will always be talking about, always be using images that will have this reference to things that are external in certain way to say it to words. No, so words are always relating with something else. No, they are using these principles, no, from the body, motion and rest and things like that. But at the same time, they are referring to something else. No, they cannot express by themselves the essence of things. No, so they will always be like a conventionalist relation between things that are external to minds and to bodies. No, so after all, I would think that there should be only one kind of language. The difference between the language used by Euclid and the language used, I don't know, the Hebrew in the scripture, or English or Spanish, etc., will be that the requirements or the number of associations we have to do with words. I would say that. No, it's not that meanwhile Hebrew or Spanish or English will need a lot of relations so we can understand one word. And let's not say apple, but let's say other words like man, or other ones, no, like being, etc., then we need a lot of more associations. But when we are using a language such as Euclid, like a geometrical, under a geometrical method, then we have a really short number of associations to that word. So that would be, but words between them are not doing the deduction, but it's the mind, the one that is doing the deduction. And like pointing out, with words, I will think about that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lionel.
Sorry, thank you, Lionel. Corey has a question, and after that, Richard as well.
Richard had his hand up first, but I also noticed that Enrique had a finger up in his screen, and maybe he wants to follow up on something there.
Yeah, I was thinking, but I'm not sure, Enrique. I will send you a chat. You are on mute, Enrique. Yeah, you want to follow up?
It is a follow up, if I may. Thank you very much. I mean, just quickly, we talked about this before, Luis, right? But it seems to me that you are assuming, right, that what Spinoza, right, says that are the problems with language and epistemology, right, applies, to all languages, right? So I would like to see an argument for that, right? And what about the idea that that this might apply only, right, to natural, right, to natural language, something along the lines that Mogens Larke, for example, right, has argued. So can you say a bit more about that?
Sure, thank you very much, Enrique. So Spinoza doesn't dedicate a lot of room in his work to language, but basically we find it in three places. One of them will be the treatise of intellectual emendation, where he has a really negative vision of imagination. So he defines imagination as the opposite to intellect. And in that place, what he says on language, he will say won't be different to what we are saying basically on the ethics and on the Tractatus of Theological Political Tractatus. And it would say, I will say first, it would say that all words are made by imagination, are first of all made by imagination. So he says that words in a first moment, all the words are used in positive way. They are referring to negative concepts, like finitude or mortal or things like that. When the reality, thanks to Spinoza in the treatise, the reality is infinite and is immortal and things like that. Because intellect comes after imagination. So here we have also a conventional view of language. And then in the ethics, what we saw is what I presented here in the paper is also a conventionalist view of language, where he says that we always form language from this experience on things. So we are making this association of sounds and of signs with things. First of all, he talks about sensory perception. So he talks about an apple and things like that. And then he starts to say that when the capacity of the human body to imagine at the same time with distinction different things is overpassed, then he will start to consider, to use language to refer to those features that affect him with more frequency. So he in the ethics, he also has a conventional view of language. So he makes no distinction between a formal and an informal, a formal and a natural language. And then in the treatise of theological political treatise, we also find this. And he will be stating the same. And then he will say that he will point out only difference, like this one, this passage that I read, this passage on Euclid, where he says that the difference will be in that when we read the scripture, the hermeneutic method that Spinoza proposes for reading the scripture, it has to consider the biography of the writer. Now, Spinoza considers that the scripture is not written by God, but it was written by a lot of people during almost 1,000 years, of period. And then to have the complete knowledge of the scripture needs a knowledge of all the biography and all the things that pass through the minds of the people that write the scripture. So we should know what they do, what they prefer, which were their desires, or which were the problems they confronted, etc. But none of these we need to know to read the principles of Euclid. For this we only have to use our minds. We don't need a profound knowledge of the language, by which we are reading the principles, the elements of Euclid. So we only use our mind and we make the deductions that are needed, and we made with everything to this through the power of thinking. So here we also have the same. So there is no, I think there is no difference for Spinoza between a formal language and a natural language. So a formal language will only be a kind of natural language. So thank you.
Thank you. Richard, thank you, Luis. Richard, now please, with your question.
Okay, thanks very much, Luis. I think actually you've just answered my question, which was going to be where you were talking about how for Spinoza, it's very difficult, or it's difficult to change the meaning of a word. And you say it's very important for Spinoza's interpretation of the scripture. So I presume this is what you were just talking about now, the interpretation of miracles, for instance.
Exactly. Because, well, for him it's important, no? Because when he's one of the questions he wants to answer in the Theological Political Treatise is if there is an adequate method to understand the meaning of the scripture. For one part, he will be saying things like what we already said, that we should have to have a complete knowledge of all the scripture. We'll have to know the life and the life of every author of the scripture, and that's impossible. No person has the possibility to know that, because, well, a lot of time has passed and we don't have the documents and anything about that. But then what can we do with that? Then we are lost and we will never have that meaning. And the solution for Spinoza is that the real meaning of a scripture is a certain moral principle that will be present in every story and of the scripture. It's not important for him. We have to understand what is all the stories of the scripture should be understood under this principle that will work as if it were one of the axioms of a deduction. And this moral principle would say that we should love God and love the neighbor as ourselves, And that's it. That will be for Spinoza the meaning of scripture. And that will be, according to Spinoza, that will be inside. And then he uses language to try to say that we cannot have, well, for one part, there is no, let's say like a divine language. No, not even Hebrew. No, it's not a divine language that God made and will be communicated to human beings. So there is no divine language. All languages are equal. So it's the same to read, well, it's not the same to read the Bible in Hebrew than in Latin and in other languages, because it is really important, considers Spinoza, the Hebrew habits of association, of mental association of things, the way they talk about things, like, let's say, he will say words like the Spirit of God will mean not exactly what they literally mean, but they will mean something like something really powerful, or they will say like in the wheat, or in a powerful wheat in a person, or things like that. So there are certain ways where, or let's say when the Hebrew says the mountains of God, there are not a mountains that belong to God, but there will be a really big mountain, something like that, like a superlative or things like that. No? So that's really important to know about the Hebrew way of writing. But more than that, one of the strongest conclusions of the theological political treatise is that being their real sense being love God and your neighbor as yourself, and if you do this and you have a really good moral life, and you are not a bad person or something like that, then you don't need to read the scripture. No, you do not need to know the scripture. No, that will be one of the conclusions of Spinoza in the political treatise. No, so all these things on language will be going in the direction to say or to assert that we only need to go to the scripture in order to defend a tolerant position on readings on the scripture. Something like that. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. And Cory, now please
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Alberto. Thanks, Luis, for your presentation. So I just had something just came up in connection with your quote at 7.1 on your handout. I was thinking of the objection that's made to Spinoza frequently after by folks like Bale and all the way to Wolff, is that he tends to make use of metaphysical terms in a way that departs from common usage. And in light of the quote at 7.1 that you pull from Ethics 3, where Spinoza says, I know that in their common usage, these words mean something else. My purpose is to explain the nature of things, not the meaning of words. It's funny that this warning should only come in Ethics 3, right, as opposed to the very beginning of the treatise, albeit it might not be something that Spinoza thought would be an objection to his conception of substance, for instance, right? But I guess I'm just wondering generally how you think Spinoza might respond to this objection. I mean, so is he going to? I mean, is he going to claim that, for instance, the discussion in Ethics 1, up through, I don't know, 1P11 or wherever it comes, I can't remember off the top of my head, but that this is basically a justification of my definition of substance, or of my definition of God as, well, I mean, substance, I suppose, is the more pertinent one. That I define substance as something that necessarily exists, right? That is self-caused and so forth. And so what if this departs from the traditional, the common usage, the metaphysical usage, whereby substance is just that which is a given particular? So I guess I'm just wondering generally how you think Spinoza might respond to that objection on the basis of what you've outlined in your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Cory. It's really also a really interesting question, and it's an interesting problem in Spinoza. So I will think that he will respond considering the production of the productivity of the words he's defining, as he's defining them. So the difference between men, when we are defining men, and when we define men as an as a being that laughs, or we define him as a featherless biped. These definitions will not lead us to understand humans' properties and to understand human passions and human thoughts and ideas, something like that. So this definition, it's a relation, it relates men, the term of men, with other terms that really doesn't help us to understand what happens in the human mind and what happens with the actions, the human actions, something like that. But if we decide, and I think Spinoza will say, but if we define man as desire, as a being that desires and has a consciousness of his desires, then we have a productivity definition that will help us to understand better passions and actions of human life. And to think, and well, that will be like a phrase, then we can say the same, well, if it is correct, we will say the same about his definition of God. Now, the difference between a definition of God as a transcendental being that is different from us, that is opposed, and then this is away from us, then this definition will need to explain everything through his will and his omniscience and omnipresence of things like that. But then we won't have really, we won't be able to understand things and to explain things through that definition. But he will say, if we use his definition of God as an unique substance that expresses itself, that is infinite and expresses itself and through infinite attributes, and which expresses themselves in infinite thoughts, or modes, then we will say that, well, he will say that this is definition, it's productive and will be able to explain everything that it's around us or something like that. So what we think that his answer will be the usage of things, of the usage of language. So what can you do with certain terms defined in a certain way, and what can you do with those terms, the same terms, but define it in another way? So I don't know if I responded to your question. Okay, thank you very much, Gary. Thank you.
We have another question. The question is from Isabel, which is in the screen, Lionel. Now it's Isabel who has a question. Please, Isabel, join us.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thank you so much, Luis, for the conference. I have a question. You said that the connotation of a word will depend on the particular experience of each one. It means that there is a distance between every person, between the ideas or in the mind, or the concepts in the mind of every person. I mean, how we can't create a scientific language, an objective language, and it is possible?
Okay, thank you very much. So I tried to explain that. And the idea is exactly I put the example of the soldiers and of the farmers. So you will have communities of persons that make the same associations about certain words. And what is important, it's also considering the Euclid example that I gave, it will be that you have a language that has a really shorter relation of concepts related to it. So the human mind can be capable of making the inference between the concepts without having to relate to a long train of thoughts to that word. So I will think that the solution, according to Spinoza, will be that language should be should be related to these definitions that are formed by the intellect and not by the imagination. And then it will be the intellect, in the human mind, the one that it will be making the inferences between concepts. And again, they will be relating them with certain words that will always be, again, defined, no, in this way. And then we will have a language that it will be a natural language. After all, it won't be well, it will be a formal language, but it's not really different to a natural language that is formed conventionally by a certain community, but it will be helping us to make this kind of inference. I would think so.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We have another question. It's from Brad Thompson. So please.
Thank you. Hey, Luis.
Hello. Hello. Thank you.
When a soldier experiences traces of a horse and then follows one train of thought, while a farmer experiences traces of a horse and follows a different train of thought, to what extent are these thought trains voluntary or chosen, and to what extent do they happen involuntarily or automatically? Or is habit involuntary but caused first by having voluntarily pursued certain trains of thought, which then become habitual? So I think I'm asking, to what extent is free will involved, or how does free will lead to or cause automatic thought trains to take place?
Okay, thank you very much, Brad. Thank you very much for your question. It will, well, in these cases, in both cases of the soldiers and of the farmer, I would think that they are involuntary. Free will is not present. After all, Spinoza rejects free will. And before I say something about free will, in these cases, they will be their frequent affections and their frequent actions related with the horses will conduce them involuntarily to make these relations and to have this, the word or the sign or the images of the horse will always have these connotations. No, so they will be involuntary. They will be formed through habit, day by day, no, by their work. Now, for Spinoza, there is no free will. Everything is determined. No, everything has causal, efficient causes, and our will is always determined. But and there's a, well, in the extended version of the paper, I introduced an explanation where Spinoza uses language to try to explain why we think we can suspend our judgment, like Descartes did when he was with the first part of his method, no? That for Spinoza is really important. But he cannot accept free will because Spinoza is considered that the attribute of thought and the attribute of extension are the same thing. So the human mind and the human body are the same thing. And what happens in one should happen in the other. So the order of ideas and the order of causes is really the same. So he cannot accept free will. But we have intuitively, we have the experience of free will. No, we in every moment we say, I don't want this, and I decide I don't want it. So I feel like I have free will. So we have to ask Spinoza why he thinks, how he explains this intuition, no, or this experience that everybody has. No? So his explanation uses language. And he says that what we are denying when we think that we are suspending our judgment, we are not really suspending our judgment because we cannot do that, according to Spinoza. We will always be affirming every idea that passes through our mind, every idea, all the time, no? So when we deny one idea, we are really having another idea that rejects that idea, and we are affirming both of them, but the ones that surpasses is the stronger one. And Spinoza never explains exactly what that means, no? But says like, and then when we feel that we are suspending our judgment, Spinoza says, this is the end of the second part in this column to proposition 49. He says that what we are doing is really confronting only words. So when I say that I am just suspending my judgment about the I don't know, the reality of this session, let's say, what I'm really doing is only confronting two words and not really thinking about that this session is not existing right now. No? So that will be, no? So thank you very much, Brian.
Yeah, good, thank you.
We have one question. One more is from Vet Lord. So, Vet,
thank you.
Please.
Thanks very much. Hello, everyone. So I wanted to ask you a question about a passage in part 4 of the Ethics, and it's the passage about the Spanish poet. You'll know the passage very well. So it's Proposition 39 Scholium. I'll just read you the lines, although I'm sure everyone will be familiar with it. So Spinoza is using this example of the amnesiac Spanish poet. He says, sometimes a man undergoes such changes that I should hardly have said he was the same man. I've heard stories, for example, of a Spanish poet who suffered an illness. Though he recovered, he was left so oblivious to his past life that he did not believe the tales and tragedies he had written were his own. He could surely have been taken for a grown-up infant if he had also forgotten his native language. Now, that's a weird passage for a lot of reasons. And of course, on one level, we may not want to give it that much credence. It's a little story that Spinoza is telling to illustrate a rather different point. But it does seem to suggest something about language that goes beyond it being just a series of associations and images. Because in the example, the Spanish poet has precisely forgotten all of the associations of images that were associated with his past life. He has forgotten everything. The only thing that has remained and the thing that retains his identity is his native language. So it seems to suggest that language somehow is a deeper structure, or it can be a deeper structure, or it's somehow more deeply embedded. And I wondered what you thought about that passage in light of, I mean, I sort of agree with your general reading about language, that it needs to be thought about in the realm of imagination, but that example seems to suggest that there's something a little bit more going on. And I guess I've been wondering recently whether language as a form of communication actually is important to Spinoza in the way that the communication of motion is important when we talk about bodies. So it seems to me there's something interesting potentially going on there, and I wonder what you think about it.
Oh, thank you very much, Beth. Thank you very much to make the relation. I really like very much that passage, and I think it's really important to consider identity for in Spinoza's philosophy and things like that. But I have not considered that related with language. But you are right. It's also considering that. And I will say also what you're saying. I will agree that it will talk us about certain different layers on the use of language. So you will have this deeper one, this deeper structure, as you said, on a native language. No, that is the one that he doesn't lose. He does not lose, but he loses everything else. No, the illness, this fever that he has, it's so strong that it will erase almost all the traces in his brain. So I think that this will be according to Spinoza, this will be explained, saying that all the traces that external objects impinging on the human body will at the same time make traces on the human brain. And the frequent ones will make stronger traces and will preserve will last longer than the ones that are not so frequent. And then I would think on that, that the illness of this poet that will be supposedly Góngora, it will be like erase almost all the other things, like his own poetry, that at the moment that he doesn't recall being the writer of that poetry, and then but will remain the first layer of language, I would say, on that. No, so you will have that. So thank you very much. It's really, really interesting. Thank you.
Well, thank you. We're on time, so I think we need a couple of minutes, you know, for a break, and then we can continue with the next speaker, which is Richard Arthur. So let's have 2 minutes, no, for a break.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Luis, for your presentation, of course.
Everyone, please join me in thanking Luis for his paper, either virtually or with a real clap, if you prefer.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for your time and all your comments. Thank you.
We'll reconvene at about 11:03. I've got it at 11 o'clock, and hopefully we'll start up by 11:05.